Hi, I'm Sheila Hamilton with Beyond Well, and I'm so happy today to be talking about moving beyond the isolation and loneliness that so many of us have felt because of COVID-19. And I have such an incredible group of friends and mental health experts with me today. Doyal Smith is the Executive Director of Dual Diagnosis Anonymous. Hello, Doyle. It's so good to
Hi,
see you.
Sheila. Glad to be
Angel
here.
Prater, Executive Director of FolkTime and an international leader in intentional peer support networking. Hello, Angel.
Hi.
And Michael Sorensen, the Business Development Director at Cedar Hills Hospital. Hi, Michael. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and I want to especially thank Cedar Hills for just being a community support right now and supporting us today as we have this discussion about ways that we can actually move beyond this sort of problem mindset into a more collaborative and creative mode. I want to talk with you, Angel, because I have spoken with you many times before about intentional peer support. And I think it provides such a great framework for people who are looking for a way to think about being in this kind of crisis mode and how they actually support themselves during it. Why is it so helpful?
Well, peer support brings a unique perspective to the table. And if we're just looking at it through the lens of peer support, we can get stuck there. If we look at this through the lens of human support. So intentional peer support was really developed by Sherry Mead with the notion of social justice, social change, and really how to be with people differently. And often in our society, we're reactive out of fear. And so if we're able to go inward and be mindful of our part in how we're reacting, we can shift how we are with people rather than what we're doing to or for people. So intentional peer support has 3 principles and 4 tasks that are intentionally brought into a way of thinking differently and being differently. And those 3 principles begin kind of like the polish on a dance floor. If you're looking at the dance floor as the principles, you're going from a place of helper to learner, learning with people. That's how help really unfolds. And we're coming from a place of individual now to really focusing on the relationship rather just than the individuals. So individual to relationship. And lastly, going from fear, which is a reactive pattern, and really honoring, not to negate fear, but to honor that it's there and to move through fear. We want to go from fear to hope and possibilities. And then the tasks are kind of the dance steps. So we need to be aware of when we're connecting, when we're disconnecting, how to reconnect. We're not taught how to do those things when we're taught how to listen, right? We're not taught to go inward. And then the second task is worldview, and that's to honor multiple truths and try to explore meaning. How people see the world is really brought from where they are, from the moment they were born to where they are today, has really shaped how they interact and see the world. And we often get stuck on the surface and make a lot of interpretations and think we know what people are seeing or experiencing.
Yeah.
And then third is the mutuality, and that's not to be confused with equality. It does not mean equal. What it means is we can be mutually engaged in this relationship and move towards what we want to create together, rather than me do to you, and we're in these dynamics of power and structure, etc. So just really honoring that we can mutually negotiate what we want to get, how we want to be in this relationship together, and intentionally exploring how we see ourselves in this relationship. And then lastly is moving towards. Often our system is, or our world, we're focusing on what we don't want and all the things we want to stop. I don't want to use again. I don't want to relapse. I don't want to, I don't want to be isolated. But how do we take and shift to start looking at what is it that we can create? What do we really want without using the words, I don't want, but I want, I will create. So the 3 principles and the 4 tasks really allow for us to go inward as individuals and be aware of our part in all these dynamics, and check ourselves and our bias, our assumptions, and our training, our professional training, and how that gets in the way of listening differently.
That was such a fantastic, just really great summary of it, Angel. And Doyle, I'm wondering, as the executive director of Dual Diagnosis Anonymous, do you embody these tools in your peer support with the people who are working on both recovery and also struggling with some sort
Yeah,
of
absolutely. Yeah.
at this point?
Yeah, there's a piece where you cut out a little bit, Sheila. Absolutely, we work with people with mental health and substance abuse or addictions in the state of Oregon, nationally and internationally, and we hire what we call dual diagnosis anonymous outreach specialists that are trained in the ability with skills to meet people where they're at, certain languages, things that are helping promote recovery and or provide resources that give them the recovery necessary. There was DDA actually, you mentioned asking me in the questions if what we do with people that, from my perspective, I work mainly with people with um, um, continuing mental illness and addiction issues. But there's this COVID-19 thing where it's mental health, mental health, mental health. And if what we do with dual diagnosis, which is actually a customized version of the 12 steps with an additional 5 steps that helps the mental health, which is really a little bit different because of the customization, we differentiate things that people would see as a defective character to mental health conditions that you just don't stop, even if you work steps around it. And then managing the mental health component with the other 5 steps. And we not only do it through our groups, but we also do it through community events and skill building and activities. But first, I wanted to say it was an honor and a privilege to be invited to share my perspective along with Angel and Michael. They're both amazing people doing life-saving work. And DDA is actually involved in both of their organizations, amongst other organizations. But I do know that the tools that we offer people who are coping with dual diagnosis and DDA are most definitely helpful to other people, especially now. In fact, we are serving and helping approximately 3,000 to 4,000 people through DDA groups and events per month just in the state of Oregon before COVID-19.
Wow.
Those people were not just DDAers though, but they're also family and friends too. And we're all experiencing episodes of anxiety, depression, anger, confusion, fear, self-defeating thoughts and or behaviors through this pandemic, some more than others. And I have to be honest, these are difficult times, but the majority of people I see in our virtual meetings or in our chat rooms or talking directly via emails or phone calls are coping and managing their fear and hopelessness. Our mission in DDA is to provide hope to those that suffer or have to manage their mental health disorders. So people who are seeking out positive support system, not isolating, being involved with constructive activities, sometimes even taking medications as prescribed, gardening, learning mantras of positive affirmations. These are all positive tools, especially daily gratitudes instead of conversing with people with negative attitudes or how messed up the government is. I mean, these are all self-defeating, perpetuating, mental health conditions that you're trying to stay away from. And in all actuality, if you're safe in your house, you have food, you have means, nothing's happening to you directly. There's ways that you can be mindful of this stuff, but usually it takes support from others or reinforcements to make sure that we can do that. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but providing first resources like food, housing, and finances, actually is going to be first and foremost with people that are coming to our web pages. We have over 4,500 people that have visited dda.org's webpage in the last month because they're soul searching, looking for resources and or help to help, not be caught up in all this stuff. And when they come to virtual meetings or chat rooms, what I'm hearing is when they've linked to somebody with similar experiences going through the same stuff and see some glimmer of hope or how other people are dealing with it, it's like magic. It's like it really sedates the depression. It helps people get focused. It gives people alternatives. It gives people even resources. The first week we did this, somebody was suicidal and just maybe 15, 20 people came on and just started talking to him, where he got the crisis intervention he needed, to where we got to be told the next day that he was doing fine. And we would have never thought that was going to happen. So
I love that, Doyle, so much. And I also just think it's so important to normalize that there are so many people who are feeling this kind of anxiety and fear. I've had one of the directors in this area tell me that it is not just people who traditionally have known to have mental health challenges. They are seeing really high performers, people who they never expected to be asking for behavioral health help, coming to them saying, I feel as if for the first time I understand what it's like to have a mental illness. So I just want to normalize the experience of extreme suffering during COVID-19.
Yeah.
We've been asked to, turn our amygdalas on, the fight or flight response, with nowhere to run. And that is a really confusing thing for our bodies and brains to get used to. Michael Sorensen is with Cedar Hills Hospital, and this is by far the one place you should write down in case anybody in your family is truly suffering in crisis, because we want you to avoid the emergency rooms and go right to Cedar Hills. But Michael, short of that, can you talk about some of the things that Cedar Hills is sponsoring and doing to make sure that people stay connected to others during this time and do not feel alone?
Sure. I just wanted to echo again my gratitude for being here today. The opportunity to be connected with you, Sheila, and all the work that you're doing in Oregon and across the country, and the reputations that both DDA and FolkTime have represented in these two leaders it's really it's amazing.
Yeah.
You asked the question, what are we doing today? And I think it's important to recognize the kind of the spectrum or the ways people enter a mental health conversation or a substance use conversation. Sometimes it's family that pushes you to seek resources or support. Sometimes it's the law. Sometimes it's your self-awareness and that awakening that you might have inside of you that says, something's wrong. This crisis is something that I don't think any of us alive today has experienced at this level. And at least in my circle. And the conversations that we're having are, what do I do with myself? I got all my goodies from work and I can't go to work, or most of my relationships were at coworkers and I don't have those connections anymore. Relying on technology has been a big deal for us at Cedar Hills Hospital. All of our outpatient programming has moved to the same Zoom platform, where we're able to provide group support to folks that are just leaving a mental health, an inpatient mental health setting, needing 5 days a week supports, building those skills that were referenced earlier, where you can go inside and find at least the questions that you need to be asking yourself, and then stepping out to the community for resources. You also asked, what are we doing to support the community in this process? We have public service messages that are going out consistently. We support professionals within the context of mental health and substance abuse treatment or substance use disorder treatment, as well as peer support programming, by providing ongoing professional education opportunities for each of the community, which can be everything from continuing professional education that's for nurses and licensed clinical social workers, or just a support group. Twice a month, we get together over Zoom and eat our lunch and have a conversation about what's going wrong or what's going right within our organizations and resources that we can share. I mean, I learned about low-cost internet, $9.95 a month at internetessentials.org. I learned about free or reduced price phone services. A lot of folks don't have a computer at home, but they do have a smartphone. And they can participate in the treatment programming that's offered here, as well as the programming DDA and others provide over Zoom right on your smartphone. But that takes a lot of data. And if you're not connected to a free Wi-Fi spot, there are programs that are supporting folks in finding this support, or finding this resource. A couple of national providers of cell phone services that have actually opened up the data limitations so that it's not a limitation for folks who are seeking these kinds of help. We sponsor organizations, we partner with organizations, we participate in committees. We put out information that is I hope, supportive to both end users or individuals seeking support, as well as professionals, as I was suggesting earlier in the conversation. And if you've ever found yourself without resources, and we do find some folks who show up at our door who don't have insurance and don't have the finances to start the treatment process at that crisis level, we do provide charity care services where appropriate and where a person qualifies. So it's I hate to say it this way, but there's
I want to,
sure.
oh, go ahead, Michael. I wanted to
just
just say, with all of the resources that Michael's offering right now, we are going to have those all listed on our webpage after this so that people will be able to link if you're having trouble with groceries, if you're having trouble with rent, if you have all of the things that Michael has compiled. They're just a tremendous resource. Thank you for doing that, Michael, very much.
Yes, of course.
I want to ask each of you guys, because I had this wonderful conversation this week with a public health expert who was saying, I've had so many conversations with people who've endured extreme events before, extreme psychological states, and they break from reality when they lose hope that they'll ever be able to figure out what's real and what's not. She said, this time reality broke from all of us. And I want you to talk about that, if you would, starting with you, Angel. It made me believe that maybe people who have suffered from extreme psychological states prior might be better at coping during this time than those of us who haven't really given ourselves the skill building. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What I failed to mention earlier was the third principle was fear to hope and possibilities. So I want to name that, and that goes right in line with what you're saying. I think the way society sees individuals who have identified extreme states, or we see those as, sometimes a survival skill, sometimes it's a spiritual experience, sometimes it's a mental health experience, and they're actually individuals with extreme resilience and adaptability to the world, and honoring multiple truths and however they identify that. And then you look at other individuals who maybe have never had an extreme experience in one way or another, however we interpret that. For me, personally, I've always been with people. Like, I'm a very socially interactive person. I'm an extrovert. I love people, and I've always had people around me in my home. And now I don't. I'm completely alone, and have been this whole time in different ways. And then working from home, boy, that has taken me to a whole nother place of survival, right? Because I don't have those personal, like, I need to touch you and hug you and love on you, and I need to be around that. When I think about people who have never experienced X, not just the pandemic, not just what we're experiencing as a whole world, that in itself is fear-based, right? It creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, and easily we can get stuck in a pattern of reacting to that fear, which then could make our wellness deplete and our challenges increase, and we can get really disconnected from our norm. And so how do we look at it through the lens of, okay, where's the opportunities internally for me today? I've learned how to garden. I've learned how to plant things. Whereas before I used to kill cactus, right? And so, so trying to look at it and think about it differently and sit through the discomfort long enough to grow through it in a hopeful way, because I can easily get to the point where I don't want to get out of bed and just isolate myself completely. That's my default place.
I also just think it's so important for all of us when we wake up and we do have those days where we feel so tired, we feel so depleted by watching what's happening around the world. We feel gaslit from the administration about how serious this really is, to actually feel the grief. I want you to pick up on that, Michael, because I know as a survivor, you have one of the most compelling stories to tell about how we really reclaim ourselves, to be able to feel the sadness, to be able to feel these emotions and still carry hope going forward.
Thank you for that lead in. I as a suicide survivor myself, I find myself not triggered, but reacting at this time in a way that reminds me of those desperate moments where I wasn't sure what tomorrow was going to bring, and I really didn't care, because what was happening today was a deep struggle. And as a young person, I found strength in both my faith tradition as well as my hope for a better future. Whatever it is that motivates you, whether it's a faith perspective, or it's a community which can sometimes feel like a faith perspective, you tend to gravitate toward that. And sometimes if you don't have a number of resources, you can feel like you're using somebody too much, which is one of the beautiful things about having a support community, whether it's faith or recovery or an art group, places where you can bond over common pain, but also build resilient skills together. I can't say enough about how important the internet has been to a lot of folks who haven't been able to go see their moms. My own parents being in their 70s, I can look through the window and I can wave, but I want them to be around, so I can't rely on them in the ways that I have. So texting has also been super important. But thinking back to those moments, I think you said earlier, those who've experienced an extreme crisis may have the ability to weather this a little bit better. I have some thoughts about that as a professional in the field, but I also have some thoughts about what's happening to folks who haven't had that awakening. And when we see the increase of alcohol sales and the number of crisis calls that we receive from folks who are in severe crisis, I'm certain there's a bell curve here, and I'm not the math guy, but I'm certain that there's some extreme ends here, and I feel like those ends have gotten longer, if you will. The spike the bell has gotten skinnier because more folks are being pushed to their crisis ends. And it's a motivator for me as a professional to be able to find new and different ways to help folks in the community. We had a plan even before this to build a second hospital in the Portland area, and down in Wilsonville, we're actually in the process of doing that. So it's tangential, but it's connected to this conversation, and that we need resources at all parts of the mental health and substance use disorder treatment spectrum. And we need to continue to support all parts of that system.
Boy, I couldn't agree more, because if anybody who's ever had a loved one who's been through a crisis experience knows that there is only so much that you can do with community support, with home support. There is a place in our community for psychiatric beds when people have reached the end of a family's ability to care for someone. And Doyle, I want to bring it back to you, because I think I looked at alcohol sales, I believe around March 3rd had peaked at almost 280% of what they normally were. And I'm imagining that drug use was exactly the same. I know that especially for friends who use marijuana to cope with anxiety, they were acting like they needed a year's supply. You think toilet paper was in short supply, pot was. So what are we going to look like on the end of this when people have been over relying on their substances rather than relying on some of the skills that Angel has been talking about?
Wow, that's a pretty loaded question there. Just so you know, I'm also a man in long-term recovery from alcoholism and methamphetamine addiction. I too had a suicidal type moment, weighing 136 pounds, screaming at the top of my lungs, with everything I owned in a bag, just not wanting to do this anymore. And I come from a long line of addicts. My mom and my sister both passed away from this stuff. And what I would say in terms of substance abuse it's funny. I'll answer that, but I also wanted to answer to the question that you said, do you think people with severe mental health conditions are more prepared for this stuff? And it's kind of funny that a lot of good things have come out of this stuff, like Michael's talking about with seeing family more, or having the internet really connect us more often. I've seen people with families really connect a lot more often now that they never did, because they were in fear of how this was affecting us and how we needed to come together, not only through peer support, but with mental health disorders. It's always been stigmatized and discriminated against and not seen as an illness. And now everybody is like having a crisis of some sort because they're either fearful of getting this or giving this or not being able to work, or they're just severely immobilized for whatever reasons. And the people with mental health disorders, Bob Nichols was our board chair, and he used to say is, I think people with mental health issues are really the normal people trying to survive in an abnormal world.
Mm.
And what we're seeing is a very abnormal world, which we're trying to see as a new norm, and be desensitized by it in a sense to really cope. And what that coping mechanism really is managing our symptoms with destructive means, which could be the drugs and or the alcohol or even whatever behavior. Of course, there's going to be an increase, but there's also going to be more of a need for help. And Oregon doesn't really do well on, I mean, it's got great treatment programs and providers and models, and it does really well when it can, but it has the worst in terms of people being able to access treatment.
Yeah.
It's got one of the worst records. So, you know, I mean, there's never enough help for this stuff. There's just never enough help. So I think that the people that have learned how to deal with this through a process, different, and there's not just one, you know, DDA is not for everybody. I wish I could say it is. Just like AA and NA and CA, whatever A keeps you out of DA is not for everyone. But there are different, my son, you met Jordan, he got better through his self-harm, cutting himself and acting out at a very young age because of some mental health stuff. Music therapy is what helped him. Right.
Yeah.
So
everybody's got to keep looking for their own thing that somehow clicks.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I really, especially for people who are watching and who are suffering, and maybe you're thinking, but I haven't heard the ticket. I haven't heard the one thing. It's because there is never one thing. There is the reaching out. Yeah, go ahead.
The one thing is the social resource
That's right.
that encompasses whatever that one thing is. You're not going to get it by yourself.
Yeah, you are exactly right. Because we're mammals, and we are intended to be in groups of people that are supporting one another, both
in teaching or providing.
Yeah. And, you know, it makes sense to me, Angel, that we're going to see cuts coming in the state. Some were announced yesterday that were devastating, that if people are relying on government programs, on subsidies to save them, they're looking in the wrong direction. We've got to look for these tools amongst ourselves, amongst wise people who have already been through extreme states and know how to get there, and people who are willing to share these tools for free, which is why I love that you're all here, because that's what I'm really passionate about as well. Angel, talk to me about the arc of someone who comes to intentional peer support, because I'm just always so struck when I speak with you about how positive you are, how giving, how much time you have to be able to educate other people. Were you like that at the beginning of your journey?
Well, thank you. I just want to make a distinction. So FolkTime is the hub, the U.S. hub for intentional peer support, which is trained, you know, as a curriculum, social change relationship model that's trained in 8 countries. So I just want to make that distinction. And it's not the only curriculum out there. I just feel that it's, for me, in line with changing the world, right? Social change is social justice. So no, I haven't always been positive. I've always had this I had a very challenged life growing up, and I'm also a survivor and have been somebody who's had thoughts, feelings, emotions around suicide since I was a little girl. And I didn't actually share that. I've been in my recovery journey for 24 years, and I didn't actually come out of that closet until about 1.5 years ago because of the stigma. And I was worried that people would start to doubt my abilities as you know, an advocate and activist and leader in our consumer survivor ex-patient movement. And so one of the things that I learned very early on in my recovery from addiction journey was that I had very much an ingrained way of thinking that glass is half empty. And surviving on the streets and surviving through years of drug use and substance use, that was a skill for me, but I didn't know. I thought I was a problem. I thought I was broken. And over the years, I've been able to realize that actually is what kept me alive during the time to survive some very traumatic experiences. And maybe hadn't I had that drug use, maybe for me, I wouldn't have been able to mentally stay together through the traumatic experiences. I had some extreme things happen to me. And so when I got into treatment, I realized that I had a lot of, negative self-talk and negative core belief about myself and who I was and my capabilities. Having an 8th grade education and living on the streets, you think that you're never going to go anywhere, right? And that you're just broken and failed out of school, dropped out, all of those things. And then when I was told, Angel, let's focus on 3 positive things to overcome 1 negative thing, and to reshift the way my brain is processing those thoughts. And so every time I'd have a negative thought, I'd have these positive affirmations and start telling myself, you are lovable, you are smart, you are capable, all the things that I didn't believe I was or could be. And then started conditioning my brain to think differently. And so I put an emphasis into the world today. I go on social media, but my social media isn't to talk about my drama in my life. My social media is my effort to do humanity some positive, put something positive into the world. And I just want to rewind a little bit about the worldview perspective that we may talk about, but there's many different avenues of wellness. I don't say mental illness, I say mental wellness, but honoring multiple truths, and that's okay. So for those who don't want to feel pathologized or feel like they have an illness, it's okay to shift the way you think about it from a perspective of, okay, I have some survival skills. My body reacts to trauma differently than someone else, and this is the way I'm living through it today. We can put it in the whole person perspective rather than just one pathway. And I think that's an important message to get out to society, because often people don't want to go to a traditional provider or have the label of ill, mentally ill, or even an addict, right? We have addictive personalities, or we become attracted to a substance that helps us survive through some really tough stuff, right? And so honoring, however you want to define that for you, honoring that you may have a different definition than someone else, and that's the honoring multiple truths. But if we're only making the assumption that we're speaking the same language and that we are understanding one another by a label, then we're not getting to the root or the ingredients of what brought us to that language. This language creates reality.
I also really love this idea about a worldview, because, we aren't in the same boat through this trauma. Everybody has different kinds of boats. And as far as I can tell, all of us have a boat that has groceries and a mortgage that's paid for. So our boat is a lot steadier than a lot of people who might be listening, and they're worried they do not have money to the end of the week. And, what I want to say is that this is a shared trauma for everyone. But because of the difference in our boats, people are having very different experiences. And I want to honor everyone's experience. I mean, I have had days during this where I have been so focused on my friends who I know are single mothers, and they may not have groceries to the end of the week, that I am panic stricken. And I am so concerned for my high-risk daughter and my partner. And, but all of my anxiety is something I create, because none of it is right here, right now. Right? Go ahead, Angel.
That's the 4 Ps that we were talking about in the other wellness. When we when we're so conditioned to react, we're reacting out of fear. And the 4 Ps are specifically, we're predicting an outcome. When we're feeling afraid, we start to predict, and then we start to pry into whatever, and then we start to prescribe what we should do or what others should be doing to avoid the prediction, which creates a power dynamic or a power over, and that could be internal or external, and that's a pattern. That's a reaction equals pattern. If we can be aware of when we're doing that, we can stop that process and say, and name it. Oh my gosh, I'm totally doing the 4 Ps and I'm reacting, right? And how do I now learn to respond, which is freedom, because it opens up all hope and possibilities. And figuring that together, it doesn't negate the fact that we're afraid, Yeah, a lot of us are freaking terrified. And a lot of us are so numb that we don't know we're terrified, but we
Yeah.
default to those positions. I have a lot of friends that I'm just like, oh, snap, they've called me and said, wow, Angel, how are you dealing with this? Because you're not so used to being like confined and alone. And I've broken down in tears, like, this is so freaking uncomfortable. And my trauma reaction is to default to suicidal thoughts or it's a progressive of trauma reaction. And to know that with hope, rather than being afraid that that's an indicator that maybe I need to go inward and find balance of mind, body, spirit, that's how I find the hope.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I
I
can
love
stay
it.
stuck there.
Michael, I want you to address this, and Doyle, jump in if you can. I know that for many people, I'm stuck in this kind of like, how much of this is true? I'm trusting exactly what the World Health Organization is saying. That's my kind of guiding light, and I tend not to be a big news consumer otherwise. In terms of the precautions I'm going to take to move forward and when it's okay to start going back in the world. But if you looked out at, a place in Texas where there's 200 people who show up on Mother's Day with no masks, it's easy to feel gaslit for being cautious and anxiety ridden and perhaps concerned. How are you guys personally dealing with the lack of a seeming North Star in terms of the truth of where the truth really is? Go ahead. I'd like to hear from both of you, if you would.
Well, I can't speak from an organizational perspective, but from a personal perspective, I do consume some news, and I do see the effects of COVID on friends and family from the conversations that similar to conversations we've had. I do know some folks who have passed away as a result of this virus, and it makes me a little frustrated when folks are thinking that it's not real.
Yeah.
Frustrated from the perspective that for me, it feels a lot like, in some ways, a lot like when HIV became a part of the news, and that it was a virus that was made to punish people, or we weren't sure where it came from, and the response was very slow. I'm proud to see the response to COVID be much more on purpose and much more concerted. I worry about a hope for a vaccine, a hope for a cure, and I think that at least from if I compare it to the HIV crisis, we all need to be more vigilant. We all need to be practicing social distancing. We need to be using our masks in public and relying again on science from that perspective.
Right.
I'm not sure that I felt the same level of fervor before I had a personal firsthand experience with someone passing because of this, but I'd like to believe that it didn't take death in order for me to see it as a reality. Yeah. But I'm watching the same struggles that you are, and have folks who are concerned about a haircut, and less concerned about, yeah, you and I don't have that.
We're all concerned about haircuts, but come on, Doyle, what's been your experience?
Okay, just so you know, we have 12 virtual meetings per week with approximately almost 1,000 people per month that are from Russia, St. Petersburg, Spain, Dublin, Ireland, all around the United States, mostly here in Oregon, all participating in dialogue around how they're dealing with this, with the mental health component and the substance abuse or addictions. And what I've been, and it's been a blessing in disguise to get so many different perspectives. And first and foremost, we don't play doctor, right? I mean, it's like, you're not a lawyer, you're not, well, some are, but for the most part, we're relying on and not being fear-based with the information that's coming our way. And in recovery, just so you know, in Dual Diagnosis Anonymous, if you're working a program of recovery, you're being responsible. And of course, it's a process, and people go through confusion, and they're angry, and or they're not following it. I mean, it's like when when we talk about the steps in DDA, it's not like if you're going to use the steps, it's when you're going to use the steps. It's like you're going to need to, because you're going to make mistakes or you're going to do things that aren't right.
Yeah.
And you need to be pulled back or you need to be put in perspective. So something comes from that and it has an outcome, which is what a program recovery is. You do something and then something happens. If you're an alcoholic or a drug addict and you can't recover and you do certain things and all of a sudden you get better, that's because it's based on that. Same thing with your mental health. If your mental health was decompensating and you're unable to manage it and all of a sudden you do certain things and it starts getting better, then that's an outcome based on that. And this whole COVID-19, there needs to be outcomes, objectives, and goals that people are following in terms of being able to get through this. And the mental health piece, is everybody's mental health piece now. It's the normal thing. I mean, to be anxious and to be depressed or to be concerned, and heightened. With people in DDA, it's times 1,000,
Yeah, of
and
course.
and people come into crisis centers getting stabilized and then going out, need that support or that atmosphere or that direction. And there's no, it's a process. It really is a process. And I love how you're being honest about how conflicting it is, because if you're doing this, Sheila, I mean, you see lots, everybody's doing this.
Well,
I mean,
of course,
this is,
I think it's so human. I love that anxiety is a human response
right.
to
It's natural.
a pandemic. I say this to my
Yeah.
daughter all the time. This is an effing
Yeah.
pandemic. Let's say it
Yeah.
out loud.
But
Like we
recognizing
should
it.
be. Of course,
Yeah.
we should be.
Recognizing, I mean, like Angel would
Yeah.
probably say, naming it, I mean, it really is about acknowledging it so you can be being honest about it, whether you're doing it wrong or right. And really getting some kind of, I call it solidarity, right?
Yes, of
You
course.
have, it's a movement where everybody is coming together in a way to where it pushes that effort. And that's how it works with DDA. I mean, we have to, if I could have done it by myself, I would have been able to, but I couldn't. It's not for everybody. And
I just
so,
want to wrap up because we're almost at time here, but I want to wrap up with one thing from each of you that you'll actually carry over to let's call it vaccine era, when we actually can move about safely, when we've all finally received the vaccine, which could be way longer than when the vaccine is actually created. So I'll start by saying that I have really enjoyed not having to cope with traffic. I have really enjoyed it. I don't think I need to go quite as many places that I have gone in the past, and I'll be relying more on this. I mean, I know that it's exhausting to Zoom, but it saves the environment, it saves resources, it saves my personal well-being. So that's one thing that I'm going to integrate into it. And I wouldn't be able to do this today if I weren't meditating. It's the only thing in the morning that really does seek to ground me. Michael, what are your techniques that you're using?
There's not a lot of opportunity to spend money in my world, and so
That's so awesome.
Saving, the idea of, I don't have anything to do, let's go to the mall or to the store.
Yeah.
Those aren't choices right now, so I'm finding other things to do, but definitely it's helping me from a savings perspective.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Angel, what about you?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I've never been able to keep plants alive. And I actually have learned through this process, that I can, and it takes intention and it takes patience and lack of noise around me. So being present and not so busy. And also I really have found that I really actually feel it's very calming to cook. Whereas before I'm like, don't even ask me to cook. I am not Susie, this homemaker type of individual, which more power to you who are, but I've never been. And I can absolutely go in a kitchen and cook all day long. And I make homemade salsa. So now the gardening will feed my salsa, or I will not purchase the ingredients anymore. And then I have this whole plan that I'm going to start a community garden in my complex in Wilsonville that I think is needed. And how fun would it be to have this way of being together? Wonderful. So those are two things I think that have really been helpful, and honoring that I don't have to be so busy here or physically, that I can learn to be present and be uncomfortable long enough to grow through that.
I love it. Doyle, what about you?
Well, on my in my world, you would think that helping other people would be effort or work, but it's not. Corbett Monica, the founder of DDA, used to say, because of this experience we're having right here, right now, we'll never be the same. We'll always take with each other from this moment on, and for that, I'll be fully grateful. And what that means is the richer you are, is the more people you connect with in the ways that you learn. And this opportunity for staying at home has done a couple of things. One, got me closer to my family, got me to exercise more often, which was hard to do. And the connection to people I've never, ever met or thought I would be able to reach has been a blessing in disguise. Just to have this happening right now.
Yeah.
So
it's so wonderful to connect with all of you guys.
Yeah. So I'm looking for the positive in things instead of the negative.
Yeah, I love that. Michael, thank you again for compiling an amazing list. We're going to put it on all of our sites. I want you just very quickly to tell people who might be listening where they can find each of your organizations. Doyle, you first.
Well, Dual Diagnosis Anonymous, Inc.org, that's DDAINC.org, is our website. And we do have a Facebook chat room, DDA chat room. And anybody who wants to be invited, we can accept. And then there's, that's the two ways that you can connect with us.
Angel, go ahead.
Sure. FolkTime is FolkTime. FolkTime.org is the organization in which I work for. And we have some resources, some partnerships. And then intentionalpeersupport.org is the central location for IPS. I do want to say that we are getting ready to relaunch our Suicide is a Language of Pain support group that we started in Clackamas County back in December. And it's specific for people who are survivors who have lived through the experience or still have thoughts and visions, etc., by survivors. And so it's specific to those of us who have even the thought of just wanting to die, right? And honoring that is a real human experience. And we want to come from a place of hope and possibilities without judgment or fear of, you don't have to worry about people reacting out of fear. We use the foundation of IPS to ensure that we're being with people.
That's wonderful. We can learn so much from that, and how common it is that people actually have suicidal thoughts. It's amazing. Michael Sorensen, how do people find you?
Well, we're on the web at cedarhillshospital.com, not org, but .com. You can also find us at 503-944-5000. Assessments are free. Anybody that has questions about inpatient or outpatient services can make that phone call. We also have a Facebook page and a hashtag Cedar Hills Hospital. Yeah, it's pretty easy.
And once again, I'm Sheila Hamilton. I'm the host of Beyond Well, and I love each of these humans in their little boxes. I can't wait to see you, and I am warning you, you'll get a hug once the vaccine is available for all of us. Thanks again for being with us, and you can see this. We're going to be playing this as a podcast as well for Beyond Well. Doyle and Angel and Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Be well, everyone.